Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're the kind of person who actively looks for ways to learn efficiently and just cut straight to the core of complex topics, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're going to completely reframe how we view interpersonal disagreements. I mean, think about it. Most of us see friction as this totally negative force, right? Something to be managed, minimized, or just avoided altogether. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if leaning into these difficult moments is actually the exact mechanism that forges the best leaders? Well, let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to genuinely ask yourself, how do you usually react when conflict first appears? Like, really think about your own visceral, gut reaction to friction. When a colleague totally disagrees with you or project expectations suddenly clash, what's your true default setting? Do your palms start to sweat? Do you instantly get defensive and put up a wall? Or do you kind of just quietly retreat, keep your head down, and hope the whole thing just magically resolves itself? Be completely honest with yourself here, because recognizing that initial reaction, that is the very first step in transforming how you handle adversity and ultimately how you lead.
Part 1, the avoidance trap. To truly understand the dangers of just dodging difficult conversations, let's look at the anatomy of a failing group project. Take Jordan, a college sophomore who, like a lot of us, absolutely hates conflict. Just look at this timeline of how things unraveled. Day 1. A teammate skips a crucial planning meeting, but, still fully expects to get credit for the work. Instead of addressing it head on, Jordan does nothing. He just wants to keep the peace. By day 5, we see the classic symptom of avoidance taking over. You get constant complaining in a side group chat, but zero action or accountability during the actual team meetings. The tension is just mounting, and the work is clearly suffering. Fast forward to day 10, and major project deadlines are entirely missed. People have basically stopped communicating altogether. Then day 12 hits. The professor actually steps in to ask why they're so far behind. Suddenly, absolute panic sets in. Everyone is pointing fingers and defensively blaming each other. It actually wasn't until day 14, literally just 2 nerve-wracking days before the final presentation, that Jordan finally suggested they sit down, calmly lay out their concerns, and just reset expectations. And guess what? Once they spoke honestly and got everything out in the open, tasks were fairly reassigned, and they managed to finish strong. The pressure had escalated to a boiling point precisely because nobody wanted to address the friction in the first place. And that brings us to Jordan's crucial realization. Conflict didn't ruin the team. Avoiding conflict almost did. By finally stepping up and addressing those unspoken issues, Jordan turned a highly stressful, toxic situation into actual, functional teamwork. And you know what the most fascinating part of all this is? That uncomfortable, super awkward conversation actually became Jordan's very first real leadership experience. He realized that the fear of the conflict was far more destructive and honestly way more exhausting than the conflict itself. Confronting it didn't break them, it built a stronger team and a stronger leader.
Moving on to part 2. Why does conflict happen? So, we've seen the symptoms of avoidance, but what are the actual root causes? To build real leadership skills, we have to understand where this friction actually comes from in the first place. Let's shift gears and look at Maya. She's a young professional just 2 weeks into her first full-time job. Out of nowhere, Maya gets this abrupt email from her manager asking why her first major report was incomplete. She felt incredibly embarrassed. Her stomach just dropped. She spent the entire morning terribly upset, assuming her new boss already didn't trust her work. But when they finally sat down to talk, they discovered a massive disconnect. And this brilliantly illustrates the core issue. Her manager assumed Maya automatically knew the company's specific legacy reporting format. Maya, on the other hand, had completed all the requested work perfectly. She just used a totally different template because, well, absolutely nobody had explained the standard company format to her yet. Maya felt like her performance was being attacked, but the clash was entirely about unspoken expectations. It had nothing to do with her capability, it was simply a lack of alignment. Maya's story perfectly highlights the actual mechanics of why tension builds in almost any environment. Most disagreements aren't caused by bad people or malicious intentions. They are usually born from 4 specific triggers. First up, misunderstandings. This is exactly like Maya's situation, where one person thinks something is crystal clear, but another interprets it entirely differently. Basically, assumptions step in to replace actual conversation and facts. Second, expectations. When rules and standards are unspoken or just assumed, disappointment is virtually guaranteed. People can't meet a standard they don't even know exists, right? Third, emotions. Look, we're human beings. Stress, intense pressure, and pure fatigue can make a tiny, totally solvable problem feel like a massive existential crisis. And fourth, competition.
Whether it's students arguing over a shared workload or professionals fighting for budget, resources, or recognition, tension inevitably spikes when we focus on winning against each other instead of understanding each other. Which brings us to part 3, the 4 conflict reactions. Now that we deeply understand the triggers, we have to look at how people actually respond. When faced with these highly stressful scenarios, most people naturally fall into what we call the ineffective trio. First, you can avoid the conflict entirely, which, as we saw with Jordan, just lets the problem fester and grow behind the scenes. Second, you can attack back, getting defensive and aggressive, which immediately damages the relationship and destroys trust. Or third, you can simply give in, totally abandoning your own needs just to appease the other person, which almost always breeds this quiet, long-term resentment. None of these actually solve the issue at hand. But there is a different path. You can make the leader's choice, addressing the conflict directly and respectfully. This is literally what separates highly effective leaders from everyone else. They don't magically live in some utopian world without disagreements. They just actively choose this fourth path to navigate them. Now, executing that leader's choice requires a very specific set of actionable steps. Step 1, pause before reacting. This is entirely about impulse control. Seriously, take a breath before firing off that angry email. Step 2, manage your emotions. Do not let acute stress dictate your long-term response. Step 3 is incredibly critical, and honestly, often the hardest. Separate the problem from the person. Remember Maya and her boss? Her manager wasn't an evil person, and Maya wasn't a bad employee. The lack of a standardized template was the problem. Blaming a person makes them defensive. Attacking a problem makes them a partner. And finally, step 4, communicate clearly. Handling conflict well requires deep emotional awareness and healthy boundaries. When you follow these steps, conflict actually transforms from a threat into a powerful tool that builds trust and strengthens teamwork. Finally, part 4, seeking clarity over blame. To turn all of this awareness into a practical tool, we really need an actionable mindset shift. So the crucial point is that strong leaders completely abandon that ego-driven desire to win an argument. Instead of immediately reacting with a counter-argument, they pause and intentionally ask questions. Instead of aggressively assigning blame to someone else, they actively seek clarity. They inherently recognize that complex situations always have multiple valid viewpoints based on different lived experiences. Their entire focus is on uncovering the why behind the tension. They address the real underlying issue, like a broken process or maybe a hidden insecurity, instead of just aggressively reacting to the loud surface-level problem. This entire mindset shift boils down to one incredibly powerful philosophy: seek first to understand, then to be understood. Real leadership begins the exact moment you stop viewing conflict as a personal attack against your ego or your competence and start treating it as a shared puzzle that you and the other person need to solve together. It fundamentally turns confusion into clarity and thoughtless reaction into purposeful intention. And that, right there, is exactly how friction forges better leaders. Before we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final challenge. Think back over your last few weeks. What is one recent conflict in your life that you initially thought was a personal slight, but actually, scratch that, might have just started from a simple misunderstanding or an unspoken expectation? Try applying this new lens to that situation. Conflict is always going to exist, but your fear of it doesn't have to control you. By developing these specific skills, you stop avoiding difficult moments and you start actively using them to become a stronger, more resilient, and way more respected leader. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to take this empowering perspective straight into your next difficult conversation.